Saad Mohseni, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya.
Thank you.
I just want to get a sense from you of how you see the world today. Lots happening.
Well, you can say that. There is a great deal of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I think that there are enormous risks, geopolitics-wise, which is, obviously issues that are dear to us. You got to just hang, tight.
Yeah.
Put your seatbelt on.
Yeah. What about what's happening today in Afghanistan? How do you read the tea leaves there?
Well, the Taliban have been in charge for 3.5 years, and they're not going anywhere, it seems. Afghanistan continues to face enormous challenges, economic, humanitarian, political, because of the uncertainty with the Taliban in charge. And as we were discussing just before, I mean, the hope is that we see some leadership from both the region and also in Washington, because I think the Taliban, there are individuals within the movement itself that are keen to engage, to open up. They're pragmatic enough. It's not a monolithic movement, but I think everyone's waiting for signals. And unfortunately, we seem to always look at, towards Washington, and this is again the case.
And in terms of who's top of the agenda, it doesn't seem as if, at least so far, Afghanistan tops the list.
It's not. But there are a number of areas, I think, which are important for us to, talk about, including CT, counterterrorism. ISIS continues to remain active inside of Afghanistan. There are lots of other groups which are of interest to the Americans, Al-Qaeda included.
Yeah.
There's the issue of drugs. The Afghans have banned the cultivation of opium and other drugs. It holds for now, but I think, if you think about, previous years, 80% of Europe's heroin came from Afghanistan.
Yes.
That's important. Refugees. Afghans can open the floodgates. Afghans can be forced out of the country because of the economic or political situation, and they'll end up potentially in Europe. And that's a huge challenge to European countries and allies.
At a time when they're facing multiple challenges.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you have issues like, rare minerals.
Yes.
Important to Donald Trump and others, including the Chinese. And there's this competition to basically secure rare minerals across the globe, with this, this competition to reach AGI and new, technologies. I think that's going to become more and more crucial. Regional stability, I think that's important. Afghanistan always plays a crucial role. I mean, you ignore Afghanistan at your own peril. And a bunch of other reasons. I think one of the things, I was in Washington last week, one of the things I heard was that of the 150 or 200,000 odd Afghans who fled to the US since August of 2021, quite a large percentage of them don't qualify. And I think Donald Trump and his team, Stephen Miller and others, this is a zero tolerance policy. If you don't qualify, if you've come illegally, if you've lied about your application, you're going to get kicked out. So I think there could be potentially thousands of Afghans
repatriated.
Yes, they would want to return to Afghanistan, and they would need the cooperation of the Taliban.
Yes. Tell me this. Do you see a large amount of engagement from the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar?
I think the Qataris have been engaged because they hosted the U.S.-Afghan talks. Even during President Obama's time, the Taliban were able to set up a sort of an office in Doha.
Yes.
And then the negotiations happened in Doha, hence the Doha talks, where they finally signed an agreement that allowed for the Americans to leave. So the Qataris remain engaged. The Americans have their mission that deals with Afghanistan based in Doha. And a bunch of other countries too, the Germans and the Brits, and then a bunch of other smaller countries, Canada and Italy and so forth. They're all operating out of Doha, dealing with Afghanistan. So the Qataris have been engaged for a number of years, and the Taliban have their political office in Doha. But the Emiratis of late have been engaged. They hosted Sirajuddin Haqqani, the interior minister, twice.
So what's behind that, do you think?
Well, I think there's a realization that, that we can't just, turn away from Afghanistan.
Yes.
It's important for regional security.
And in the past, that's never been a good idea.
Well, I mean, I think every time we've ignored Afghanistan, something's gone wrong.
Yes.
You know, the Americans were involved in the 80s. They helped the Afghan Mujahideen fight the Soviets. Then they walked away. And then we saw the Taliban return and Al-Qaeda and 9/11 happened. So I think there's some history there. So that sort of concern, you know, it makes people feel that they can't just turn away. It's just too close to many things important to the region.
Tell me about what it's like working under the Taliban, because you have how many people working for you there?
We have 450 people. We
Incredible.
have 5 TV and radio networks. We have dozens of digital platforms. It's not easy.
Yeah.
You know, we've had to make, you know, we've had to, you know, there were lots of concessions,
Yes.
compromises.
Freedom of speech?
Well, I think it could have been worse. Yeah, there are certain things we have to self-censor. Obviously, we have to be conscious of the sensitivities in Afghanistan today. We're not as free as we were.
Yeah.
But then I think we're still a lot freer than a lot of other countries in the region, to be honest with you.
Really?
We can pretty much cover everything, probably sometimes with little fanfare, but
Yes.
we can discuss almost anything. The criticism, you know, there are criticisms of the regime when it comes to girls' education or sort of the lack of inclusivity in terms of the governing body and so forth, human rights violations. But it's done in a very subtle way without much fanfare.
Yes.
We can't have music, we can't have soap operas. But otherwise, it's if you turn the TV on, at least for the first few minutes, it seems very normal. But our female presenters have to wear surgical masks to cover their mouths, as is required by the state. But they're still working. As a matter of fact, we have more women working for us in our news department today than we did in 2021.
Wow.
So we've made a conscious effort to employ women to train them.
Yes.
So they're still active in front of the camera, behind the camera.
Yeah. In your mind, is this more of a public service that you're putting forth now? And I mean employing people.
But I think we're still playing an important role in terms of giving news to Afghans,
Yes.
entertainment programs, and vice versa. I mean, a lot of news that comes out of Afghanistan is thanks to organizations such as ours.
Yes.
You know, 40 million people, it's a big country.
Yeah.
And the world was really engaged in Afghanistan for
Yes.
a long, long time.
Well, we promised them a very different future than we left them with.
Yes, but Afghanistan has changed. You know, if you look at the younger generation of Afghans, the urbanization of the country,
Yes.
you know, the genie's out of the bottle.
Yes.
And, you know, 3.5 years on, the concern was that the Taliban would fundamentally change Afghanistan, and it's trying to.
Yes.
But
really roll everything back.
attempting to roll everything back. But at the same time, this new Afghanistan has also managed to change the Taliban.
Yes.
In a lot of ways. If you go to the major cities, how they conduct themselves, because the cities pretty much function as they did before. You know, women walk on the streets, you know, mostly faces uncovered. Some women drive their cars, you know, there's no effort to stop them. They continue to work, they continue to appear on television. So, you know, first glance, things do not look that different. They go to restaurants,
Yes.
they socialize and so forth. But then at the same time, this thing with girls' education is a major issue for everyone.
How
actually.
do you guys address that? Because I know you do educational programming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, television and online educational programming on radio as well is it's a sort of it's a bridge, basically.
Yes.
You know, from the time that education was banned to a time when hopefully they'll reopen the schools. It is not an alternative to proper education, girls going to school.
Yes.
But we felt that, you know, from grade 7 onwards, girls are not allowed to go back, but they need to continue to learn. So we felt that certain subjects, mathematics, chemistry, physics, and biology,
Yeah.
we could actually come up with, you know, really smart, interesting, engaging education programs.
And you're not getting pushback from the government on that.
Well, the programs reflect the curriculum.
Yes.
And mathematics is mathematics, no matter where you go.
Yes.
So these programs for grades 7, 8, and 9 initially, and now we've expanded beyond that, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades, are very, very popular.
I'm sure.
Half the country's kids watch it. watch these programs or listen to them. And the results have been phenomenal. I mean, we've done a sort of a baseline now, an endline assessment of how kids perform. And the ones who watch these programs do, like 50% better than kids who don't watch these programs.
Yeah.
And we have a trial of WhatsApp sort of tutoring program. And the kids who watch these, or the ones who are engaged via WhatsApp, performing, their numbers are 200% better. So we're seeing real change in terms of how it's impacting kids, and it's an extraordinary result for us. Something to be very proud of.
Tell me this: when you think about the future of Afghanistan and your role as a media organization there, have you gotten support or pushback when it comes to your affiliation with the United States? Do they think that you're too Western? Do you think that that's something that, frankly, they welcome quietly? What does that look like for you?
Well, initially, I mean, obviously, we were sort of stamped as being very pro-Western because of all our programs. So initially, when they first took over, I mean...
You were under suspicion, I imagine.
Well, absolutely. And I think we were all surprised how quickly they took over the country.
Yes.
I had assumed that it'll take months. And we had plans to move a lot of people out and continue our work, sort of a hybrid.
Yes.
Inside of Afghanistan, outside of Afghanistan. And they came in very, very quickly, and we were surprised. And then we had to make a decision. Do we leave or do we stay?
Yes.
And at the time, we felt, we could not, work with them, but work within the new environment. And we made that commitment to stay, partly because we had so many people employed, and partly we thought, well, it's better to be within the country, and to engage with them and to push back where we could. I mean, just on this girls' education program ban, since 2022, when the ban was imposed, we have literally done thousands of stories, thousands of panels, thousands of town hall type meetings, questioning this policy, amplifying the voices from within the Taliban as to why this is not right for Afghanistan.
Yes.
And we continue to do that. So I think that's really important.
Do you consider this as a major step back for Afghanistan, or is this just another bump in the very long road?
You just don't know. Yeah, it is a step back. The question is it, we've taken a couple of steps back to take 100 forward, or is this a permanent thing? And we don't know that.
Yes.
But I think we have a responsibility as Afghans, because, there's this propensity for, people in our region to say, oh, what are the Americans going to do? What's the, what are the Europeans feel like doing?
Who's coming to save us?
Who's going to come and save us? And I think we have the sense of entitlement that the world needs to do more for us.
Yes.
But I think for me, having lived in Afghanistan for 20 years and having I have changed my views a lot over the last 20 years. I think we have to look within. And I think it's upon us, Afghans, and, other Middle Eastern nationalities, to change our own fortunes and take things into our own hands.
Well, you may well have to, considering how, America First is unraveling at the moment.
Well, American aid, which I think is still at 600 or 700 million last year, is down to zero.
Yes, which requires the Taliban is going to have to step up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What is going to be the major export in your mind?
Out of Afghanistan? Well, I mean, what's interesting is that what could save the day for Afghanistan, not necessarily for the Taliban, are remittances. Yes. Which have shot up, partly because so many people have moved out over the last 3 or 4 years, and they still need to actually help their families. Yes. But also, I think there's a sense of responsibility. We've got to do more. Our cousins, parents are on the verge of starvation. Let's send more money in. So I think that's helped the economy to an extent. But I think the Taliban, in their own ways, weirdly, are engaged with the private sector. They want to do more. If you look at reconstruction projects, despite limited budgets, they seem to be doing a lot more. At least the optics are good. Yes. In terms of road building, building dams and so forth, and you go across the country, you see a lot of activity. And of course, the country is stable now. It's feels safe. Yes. You can go from province to province. They're very proud of the fact that the country is more secure, but it's lost on them that they played a major role in the insecurity of the country prior to the withdrawal of the Americans. But that helps too, of course.
The perception has been in the West since the fall of Afghanistan since the withdrawal, that an iron curtain, to quote Churchill, had fallen.
Yeah.
But you're telling me that's actually not necessarily the case.
No, I mean, people can leave the country, they can go into the country. We have 3 flights from Dubai. Fly Dubai flies into Afghanistan daily. Flights from Turkey.
They're
now.
not closed off.
They're not closed off, and I think people go in, and there's quite a bit of activity, especially from a lot of diaspora Afghans go and visit.
Yes.
The country is not sanctioned per se, unlike Syria. Individuals are sanctioned, but the country is not, so you can go and do business, technically speaking. And there are opportunities. A lot of Chinese companies, Iranian companies are there active, but the economy is really, I mean, the country is always on the verge of economic collapse,
Yes.
humanitarian crises. You know, the Taliban alone cannot save Afghanistan. We need the world more engaged. We need foreign investment.
Yes.
We need people to be able to send their kids to school. I mean, the country's population has doubled since 2020. The median age is still 18. This young, vibrant country. Half the country, there's an attempt to silence half the country today.
Yes.
And we need to collectively stop that in Afghanistan. But we also need the international community to continue to insist that things need to change.
What about China?
I think China makes a lot, I mean, I think it's dawned on the Taliban finally that the Chinese make a lot of promises but deliver very little.
Interesting.
Right? And, you know, our group, we've been active across the region. We had a big business in Ethiopia, so we were all over Africa looking at other opportunities. And the experience was not dissimilar in Africa. The Chinese come in, they exploit what we have. They don't create too many jobs within the country. It's usually through some sort of a financing arrangement.
Yes.
And then they leave. And they also leave their people behind, you know.
Yes.
I mean, in Ethiopia, you know, I met a whole bunch of Chinese individuals who speak fluent Amharic.
Yes.
You know, and a lot of them came with Chinese projects.
Right.
And then the Chinese left, and they're in
there they are.
There they are. You know, Chinese passport holders, but essentially Ethiopian today.
Yeah.
So I think in Afghanistan also there's this realization that the Chinese are not going to be that generous.
Yes.
That, yes, they may assist when it comes to humanitarian assistance, but otherwise they're going to look at opportunities, but they're going to be very opportunistic.
Yes.
And it's going to be what's good for China rather than Afghanistan.
So the Belt and Road Initiative, not as promising as one would have thought.
But I think we're seeing something similar in the U.S. today. You know, there's this policy that no development.
Yes.
We're going to do some humanitarian, and then it's going to be about investment and what's in the interest of the U.S. So if you look at the DFC, for example, you know, 60-odd billion that, you know, that they could potentially access for investment or lending purposes. Leon Black's son, Benjamin Black, has been nominated. I think he's going to get confirmed in May. But now the thinking is, let's double this. And there's even talk that the DFC could look at both domestic and international opportunities. So I think the Americans are also looking at the Chinese model and saying, hey, this could be in our interest. We should be adopting this sort of a strategy when it comes to dealing with the international community.
What's the win in your mind
for Afghanistan?
Yeah.
I think the win is I think the two important things for us Afghans is more inclusivity.
Yes.
They have to have a more inclusive governing body that reflects, you know, this sort of very complicated country called Afghanistan that's multi-ethnic and diverse and so forth. And the other one is girls' education and women's rights.
Yes.
This is not a Western thing. This is an Afghan thing. And that's why I think it's important for Afghans from within Afghanistan and also outside to keep on pushing for this. I think these two things are very important. Other than that, Afghanistan could progress very quickly. And of course, you know, there's some of their more backward policies in relation to religion and so forth, and they need to reassess that. But many within the Taliban have a much more pragmatic, moderate approach to some of these issues. So I think we don't need much.
Yes.
We just need the country more engaged. They need to open up, but the world also needs to engage. And I think Afghanistan can change fairly quickly.
What does engagement look like from the West, beyond humanitarian aid?
Well, I think the West is interested because of you know,
radicalization,
these extreme organizations like ISIS. I think it's very important that you know, Afghanistan is now, you know, more of a threat when it comes to ISIS than Syria.
Yes.
So, I think that they can't just turn away from that. I think it's important, not just for the West, but I think also for the region.
Yes.
It's very important. Afghanistan also is, it has a very large population, can contribute to development across the region. I mean, when it comes to the Gulf, for example, we can
Yes.
provide, a huge workforce for development in the rest of the region. I think that's important. But also it can become the breadbasket of the region. I mean, agriculturally, Afghanistan has
Yes.
plenty of land, plenty of water. It's known for its products, whether it's vegetables or dried fruit and nuts and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a sort of a transit hub for the
Yes.
region, connecting Central Asia to South Asia, opening up, this very sort of affluent part of Asia, the Stans, to the rest of the world. And of course, our rare minerals. I mean, I think the U.S. geological body, assessed what we have, and we
Yes.
have trillions of dollars worth of rare minerals, which I think is going to be important in this new AI age.
Can you see the Americans working in Afghanistan again?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I was in Washington last week. I was sort of felt hopeful that, that there are issues that I think the Americans could look at in terms of, we talked about refugees,
Yes.
returning Afghans, threats of CT, but I think also on the positive side.
So you think
I think
a Trump administration could benefit from engaging with the Taliban when it comes to rare earths?
Yes,
Better the U.S. than China?
absolutely. And I think it's also to deprive the Chinese of securing Afghanistan's rare minerals.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important I think the Americans may shy away from directly engaging, and I think there's going to be an opportunity for them to engage via the region.
Yes.
People who've been dealing with the Afghans for a long time.
Yes.
I mentioned the Qataris and of course others too.
Yeah.
And I think the Saudis, although they're really busy and preoccupied with their own domestic challenges and opportunities,
Yes.
the foreign minister of Afghanistan Muttaqi was in Saudi Arabia last week actually, and
Yes.
we may have had some high-level meetings, and I think there's going to be also opportunities for the Saudis also to engage.
Tell me about Pakistan, a complicated relationship. How do you view that today?
Well, I mean, Pakistan it's almost like a curse.
Yes.
You're damned if you turn away from it, and you're damned if you don't turn away from it. I think but we have to remember it's a nation of 250 million people,
Yeah.
120 nuclear warheads. It's facing it has an economic crisis that it's been dealing with for many years. It's got a political crisis with perhaps its most popular politician ever behind bars.
Yes.
It has an insurgency issue challenge with ISIS, the TTP, Pakistani Taliban, and the Baluchi
Yes.
separatists active.
Do you see it perhaps more unstable today than Afghanistan?
Yes, you could say that.
Yeah.
And it's a country that's been dominated by the military since partition. We're talking about 90, almost 90 years. But I'm not sure how much of an appetite the administration has to jump back in.
Yes.
But economic, again, business deals, this transactional approach to things, maybe that's where the opportunities lie.
Yeah. Tell me this, as the Moby Group and just as we see the industry evolving internationally so significantly, channels that once we thought were staples are potentially going to go away. How do you see the media landscape today?
It's going to be very fragmented,
Yeah.
I think. And I think we have to address what people want to see.
Yes.
And, we're launching a number of platforms, basically, for a younger generation, for sort of the Generation Z of our neck of the woods.
Yes.
And
is this TikTok, YouTube, all the platforms?
I mean, you have to be almost platform agnostic.
Yes.
You create content, and you slice and dice it for different platforms depending on what they are. And there's going to be more. I think identities have become more important than brands. Identities now give brands credibility rather than the other way around.
Yes. But it's fascinating, isn't it?
But it's the truth, because if you look at today, it's, we're looking for Joe Rogan.
Yes.
He's on Spotify, he's on YouTube, he's on iTunes or whatever.
Yeah.
He's across everywhere, but we look for him rather than sort of the platform.
Yes.
And I think
they're struggling to know how to monetize this. I mean, the big brands, the advertising models are dead. How do you then evolve quickly?
I think it has to be a win-win situation.
Yeah.
You have to look at, you know, the identity, the talent,
Yes.
and work out deals with them that would actually benefit both the platform and the individual. But I think what's also important is that the corporate brands
Yes.
are failing to meet the needs of their viewers, of their listeners.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why these individuals,
Mm-hmm.
even if they have 20,000 or 100,000 followers, are so, you know, they're so tapped into sort of the zeitgeist
Yes.
that they can actually determine as to what sort of programming works better.
Yes.
Because if you work for a major media company,
Mm-hmm.
you've got committees, people need to sit around the table, look
Yes.
at what's, you know, what
Got a
could work on it.
P&L, all the things.
These kids can just churn out content,
Yes.
and within 2 or 3 days, they have their sort of live focus group of 500,000 viewers.
Yes.
Now, for older audiences, the over 60s, yes, they will continue to go to linear networks and, you know, watch their satellite networks.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for younger people, increasingly,
Yes.
it's going to be on other devices.
Who's getting it right?
Well, in terms of the major platforms,
Yes.
I'm not sure anyone's getting it 100% right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we try to be as nimble as possible,
Mm-hmm.
working with these identities. But even, you know, we feel sometimes that we're getting left behind. But what we're lucky in Afghanistan is that it's a single TV household. So,
Yes.
you know, like 85% of the population has access to a television set. So it's still usually, you know, one person with a remote control. And internet penetration's low.
Yes.
So we're sort of, things are happening in slow motion, so we're benefiting from that, and we're able to look around and see what works in other places and adopt it. But time, it's gonna shrink.
Yes.
The time to move will shrink. But we're finding these, you know, young identities and working
Yes.
with them as much as we can.
Do you know that we met almost 15 years ago
Wow.
at an Abu Dhabi media event?
Yes.
And it was at that time that...
You were
know,
like 12. And
I was 12, exactly, clearly.
Yeah.
But what was fascinating is even at that time, you know, we had obviously the big networks, the big brands, cable, but these things were coming. These things were starting to evolve. We were talking about bloggers.
Yeah.
And even, I think the change has been significant. What do you foresee in the future?
Well, I think a very, very, very fragmented market. I think
Yes.
that's very important. But I think people will start. I mean, I think fake news
Yes.
is going to become a challenge,
Yeah.
and I think people will go back to how stories are verified. So I think that's where brands can play an important role.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an umbrella, like for example, if we set up a sort of a Gen Z platform for, say, Arabic, which we're working on.
Yes.
And then under it, we have 25 or 30 individuals. And, you know, we're sort of, there's sort of, you know, we sort of sponsor, you know, XYZ brought to you by
Yes.
us, for example.
Yes.
Or the other way
The
around.
brand identity.
Yes. I think people's, you know, that will give people some comfort.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to also respect in terms of what the viewers want. And the social media identity in terms of not trying to corporatize what they're doing. So it's going to be, and we have to learn as we go along and we develop this.
Yeah. Do you see sort of the big names falling by the wayside? And I mean, we're already seeing the pressure that's on CNBC, MSNBC, CNN.
I think it's well, it's going to be a slow death.
Yes.
It's not going to happen that quickly, but it'll happen eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But what's also interesting in the US, if you look at it, so we have, you know, Netflix and Apple and Disney and blah, 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 HBO. We have 20 different things. So effectively, we've got, and now people bring it together, like Google, for example,
Yes.
or Apple. It's under the same umbrella. So we're actually also going back to a cable
Model. Yes. Just with different entities.
with different entities. So
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, this, you know, the idea of a basket of platforms is still going to be appealing.
Yes.
May not be called cable, it may be called, you know, Apple TV, for example, or
Yes.
Roku or something else, but that's going to exist in some form or another. My thing is just in terms of, you know, this is for like catch up, streaming and so forth, you know, scripted content, perhaps sports. But I think for everyday stuff, because kids are now watching these 2-3 minute clips for like 4 or 5 hours a day.
Yes.
Right? On TikTok and so forth. So they're going to be distinct, two different, distinct approaches to media and content.
What is something that you want to get into, but you're not there yet?
I think for us, in the Middle East, 250 million people in the Arab world at least, and growing very fast. I think the younger people are underserviced.
Yes.
Right? I think the media still has this very didactic, condescending approach to, this is good for you, you got to watch this program. But I think it's going to be the other way around. So I think for me, it's going to be interesting to create something that's more sort of bottom up rather than a sort of top down approach.
When you think about content creation in the region, it's an underserviced region even today.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, by how much?
Well, I think that there's so much talent when it comes to music, poetry, art, and so forth. But I think we just have to sort of give people the opportunity. And we've done this for 20 odd years, even in Afghanistan for our linear platforms. We'd find a 15, 16-year-old and say, hey, what do you think will work?
Yes.
And he would come up with an idea, and we would help him develop it.
Yes.
We never told him what to do. So our sort of creative people were always very young people. So it was led by them. And I think we want to have a similar approach, but for our digital platforms.
What is the world getting wrong in your mind when it comes to Afghanistan?
Well, I think they've tried. I think, to give people credit, I think there was a lot of goodwill in 2001, 2002. It was squandered, and I've mentioned this in my book, which is out today, that, I mean, again, looking within, we squandered this enormous opportunity. We literally flushed Afghanistan's lottery ticket down the toilet. But the international community also made a lot of mistakes. Hundreds of billions of dollars was spent.
Corruption?
There was a lot of corruption. I mean, there was the institutional corruption with the Beltway bandits, the big contractors in Afghanistan. The money just basically never went inside the country.
Evaporated.
Well, a $2 million, a road project, $2 million per kilometer was subcontracted to a Turkish company for $500,000 per kilometer, then was subcontracted to an Afghan company, true story, for $200,000 per kilometer, so 10% of the budget. The road fell apart within 2 years because of the extreme temperatures in Afghanistan. That served no one, basically. And that money basically never really benefited Afghanistan. All ghost schools, ghost teachers, ghost soldiers and police officers and so forth. A lot of money went missing. Corruption within the country, and of course institutional corruption in terms of these large companies. And weirdly, because of the changes with Doge and everything else, I mean, these countries are actually suffering, thank God. But also I think we Afghans, we could have made better use of this opportunity. But the country did change for the better, despite everything. And I think we're in a much better place than we were, say, in 2000.
So 3 years on from the fall, in your mind, how much responsibility does Joe Biden bear for the mess?
Well, I think let's go back even further. I think Donald Trump and the way the deal was negotiated, and leaving out the rest of Afghanistan, not necessarily the Afghan government, which was corrupt and unpopular, but the rest of Afghanistan, civil society, the business community and so forth, they should have been included in the negotiations with the Taliban. But Biden, I think Biden just didn't like the region, didn't like Afghanistan, didn't like Afghans. And his plan was not thought through. They decided in mid-April to leave, and they left by the end of August. And it wasn't well planned, as we saw.
Yes.
And it'll be forever a stain on his reputation to have done what he did to Afghanistan and to America's reputation.
Yeah. Were you surprised that the Afghan government fell apart as quickly as it did?
Well, I was in Washington, and I've mentioned this in my book, in late July, and I met with Jake Sullivan and Samantha Power and a whole bunch of other people. And I said, listen, the Afghan government could fall by November. And I remember someone saying, oh, come on, you're being an alarmist. I said, listen, I mean, it's in Afghanistan, it's always been, lowering one flag and raising another. The fact that you're leaving, it means a lot of people will just switch sides. Yes. And it had not clicked that this could happen so quickly. And again, it showed we showed at the time that they hadn't thought this
They were
through.
just disengaged.
They're completely disengaged.
Yeah.
You know.
What were your feelings on that day when we saw planes taking off with people hanging off the sides?
It was a very stressful few weeks. Because a lot of staff would sort of end up at the airport wanting to leave, and some were truly vulnerable, and others wanted to make the most of the opportunity to find a better home.
Yes.
But the other important thing was how to keep the business going.
Yes.
You know, in the morning, the guys would show up. By mid-morning, they were gone. So the head of our news would ring up and say, "Hey, we've got no camera people. We don't have a presenter." And we'd advertise, and a guy would show up and say, "Here's a microphone. Go and do a story."
Wow.
And it was like that. I mean, we just lost so much capacity in the first, few weeks.
Yes.
That survival became the most important issue.
Yes.
So I was focused on that. My brother was focused on, in terms of helping people with their paperwork if they wanted to leave.
Yeah.
So it was lots of sleepless nights, but there was a great deal of anger towards Joe Biden and the Americans and what they had done.
Are you surprised they didn't shut you down?
The Taliban, yes.
Yeah.
But weirdly, and again, and you can't sort of generalize about the Taliban because, again, different individuals have different points of view. A lot of them do feel that they're of the people for the people.
Yes.
So, they didn't like us because they saw us as this very pro-Western, pro-American platform.
Yes.
But over time, we built a relationship with them and built the trust that's needed in
Yes.
a place like that to be able to operate.
Are you getting any American funding now?
No.
No.
No. I think we benefited from like capacity building and training programs and so forth. But overall, we were not, directly assisted by any organization, which was a good thing. But Afghanistan's economy will no doubt suffer because the money that they gave Afghanistan went through the food program and so forth.
Yes.
So it benefited the country. So I think it's going to be a bit jarring in the next 12 months in terms of the economy itself.
Could that impact this government's ability to continue to lead?
What we've seen in North Korea, we've seen in Iran. I mean, I think sanctions or loss of funding doesn't necessarily weaken these regimes.
Yes.
But I think it would, the situation, people's situation may deteriorate,
Yeah.
continue to deteriorate. Hence the importance of engagement for the Taliban and also for the Afghan people.
So what could the United States do in your mind?
I think the reason why it's important to engagement doesn't mean recognition. I think I have to make that very clear. Because a lot of people say, well, you want the Taliban to get recognized? No, but they need to talk. So I think there has to be a roadmap that makes it very clear to all sides that what engagement could mean in the medium to longer term for both sides.
Yes.
So it becomes very clear. And it has to be an international effort, whether it's a UN or, a number of countries coming together to lead these talks. I think that's important. Yeah. I think even the Russians and the Chinese have expressed the importance of women's rights and girls' education and so forth. So the world is on the same page on these sorts of issues.
Yes.
So I think they need to sit down, they need to talk, they need to address things like girls' education, inclusivity and so forth, and then have a roadmap that could eventually lead to full recognition of the Afghan state, basically.
You mentioned Russia. They've come up a lot in the news lately. They've certainly been sending their representatives to the region. In your mind, is there a role for Vladimir Putin in those talks?
In Afghanistan? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the Russians are important, the Iranians are important, the Chinese are important. I think the Gulf countries are very important.
Yeah.
Qatar, Emirates.
So in that vein, is Donald Trump opening up talks with Russia? Opening up talks with Iran. Is this a good thing?
As long as it leads to something.
Yeah.
Because I think if the talks fail, and they could fail, it could make Afghanistan even more dicey. Because then, there are certain countries who would not want to see the Americans find a foothold in Afghanistan again.
Yes.
And I think that then we'll see a replay of the great game,
I think we're already there.
Have
we ever left?
Well, yeah, the great game has been happening since the late 1800s. It's never gone away.
Yes.
But I think that if talks fail with the Iranians as well as the Russians, I think there's a risk that Afghanistan will become the battleground, the new battleground for these countries again.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you and I know each other from the region. The impact of lower oil prices means that they can't, you know, have as much foreign influence as perhaps they would like, UAE, Saudi Arabia. In your mind, how dangerous is that?
Well, I mean, I think that they still have enough resources to continue to remain engaged in Afghanistan. I think because I think it's one thing to build NEOM, it's another thing to ensure that your country remains stable and secure.
Yes.
And I think that if Afghanistan or Pakistan implodes, everyone else is going to get very sick.
Yes. In your mind, next steps. Obviously, you've been in Washington, been talking to them about engaging in the region. There's a lot of things on the Trump agenda. In your mind, how quickly could something move?
Well, I think for the Trump administration, I mean, they still have these nominees. They need confirmation. We still don't have an assistant secretary of state
Yes.
for the region. They have someone at the White House, but obviously they're not as engaged. I think Rubio will probably perhaps play in a more important role. So I think there are 2, 3 avenues. One is because Afghanistan is part of the region and it involves Russia and Iran, that someone like Steve Witkoff would take it on board.
Yes.
Or there's the opportunity of, you know, Benjamin Black saying, well, this is important for us, rare minerals. Let me look at Afghanistan, the context of how we can secure these minerals.
Yes.
Or Stephen Miller may say, hey, I need to get, you know, rid of 10,000 Afghans, send them back to Afghanistan via Qatar. Let me engage on Afghanistan. So the question is, who's going to own Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Will they have a special envoy, or will they let the existing diplomats run the country? So there are a lot of ifs.
Yes.
And Mike Waltz, who lived in Afghanistan, who I met in 2004, I think it was, in Kabul when he worked for the embassy, will he say, no, I'm going to put my hand up and I'm going to deal with Afghanistan?
Yeah, so it's really about passing the football at this point.
You know, this is not, you know, the United States is now a bit like a Middle Eastern country.
Yes.
You know, we're at the sort of mercy of Donald Trump, the president, and who's going to have access to him, and who's going to put his hand up, and who he's going to say is like, you manage this thing for me.
Saad, it's great to have you on Al Arabiya. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.